Welcome for some more affordable fixed blade content and perhaps another entry in my medium-sized martial knife exploration journey. And I know I've been promising a shift of content back to doing sword reviews. I also have a massive pile of hawks and hatchets I need to evaluate. But as it turns out, the injuries I incurred during the big move aren't quite done with me yet. My knee, my back, definitely telling me, take it slow, take it easy, and stop doing stupid stuff. And it's really hard for me not to do stupid stuff, especially when there's a lot of stuff to do around here. And speaking of stuff to do around here, as I've mentioned in previous videos, the expenses I incurred during the move and with other things that happened in my life about the same time, it's really impacted my budget for swords and knives and things. So I've been on the lookout for affordable products and also free samples. And the knife we're looking at today is not only affordable, but yes, I got it as a free sample from Flissa. Now, Flissa is all over Amazon. They're always coming up in my searches. They have lots of knives and tools that usually get, well, pretty good reviews. And apparently they found me on something called Upfluence. And I never heard of Upfluence before, but sounds like some sort of LinkedIn for influencers. And I did not know I was listed as an influencer anywhere on the internet. So that was quite a surprise. But they reached out to me because they were coming out with a new knife. And when I saw the picture and the specs, I said, yeah, absolutely, I'll take a look at it. It seems like it's right in my wheelhouse. And they're calling it their 12-inch Bowie. Now, one thing I do have to get out of the way up front, when they're talking about 12 inches, they're talking about overall length. The blade length is more like 7.5 inches, which puts it in the size class of several other medium-large knives we've already looked at on the channel. It's basically the same size as a K-Bar USMC. So let's take a close look at it. I'll put it through my usual test battery. And yeah, I'll also compare it to knives that are similar in size, design, and philosophy of use. Okay, let's start as we usually do with the sheath. It comes with a nice thick brown leather sheath that is double stitched. The belt loop is triple riveted on, so I don't expect that's going to fail. The fourth rivet restricts the size of the loop, but it is giving you more than 2 inches, plenty of room for most belts. And also plenty of room and flexibility to move with me, and we'll talk about that in carry and deployment. Speaking of carry and deployment, yeah, there's a little bit of rattle in there, but that makes for a very smooth, snag-free draw, and the knife isn't cutting up its own sheath. But that also means that retention is dependent on this thumb brake strap. In previous videos, I've mentioned I'm not the hugest fan of thumb brake straps that are up here on the grip. But this one has a nice, generous tab. It's very easy to find. And instead of a snap, it's got a stud, which is interesting. I don't know how this is going to hold up over time, but at least for now, with very little break-in, release is very positive. I will admit it's a little bit more of a fumble than a snap would be to get it re-secured, but I'm getting used to it. Another nice touch with these is that thumb brake strap secured by a single rivet allows it to be rotated so you can decide which way it breaks. On to the knife itself. Starting with that affordability factor. On release on Amazon, it's going for just a little less than $30 US. I don't know if it's going to stay at that price point, but for that you are getting a 7 CR17 MOV blade that my test files are saying somewhere around 57 HRC, which is as advertised. So they're not necessarily going for the hardest edge. I think they're going for durability for hard field use, and we're definitely going to see how it performs. Overall length, it's actually a little over 12 inches. I'm measuring 12 1/8, about 31 centimeters, with a weight of 10.4 ounces, 295 grams. So it does have some mass to it for chopping and other things. Point of balance, just in front of the guard. All right, get back to the blade, but let's talk about the friendly end for a bit. Stacked leather construction. Very smooth, no gaps, no flaws, no hot spots. Some nice accents to it, stainless steel guard and butt cap drilled out for a lanyard. As for the tang, they do provide an illustration that shows a robust rectangular stick tang, like a K-Bar USMC. But on the K-Bar USMC, I can clearly see a pin holding that butt cap on. I don't see any means of attachment here, so I don't know how it's held together. And we're certainly going to see how it does hold together. It is, for me, a bit beefy in hand, because I do have kind of stubby fingers, but that is useful for certain tasks. And yeah, that leather does get grippy when it gets damp. Also have a nice smooth transition up onto the spine, but yeah, I don't have any place for, getting my finger up. I can kind of without hitting the blade because of the sharpening notch here. So yeah, I can get close to it for close work, and we'll see how it does in close work. Fine carving and things like that. But okay, specs of the grip. Overall usable length, I'm measuring at about 4¼ inches, 11 centimeters. Yes, I'm looking down at my notes to give you the metric as well as the imperial. Widest point of the swell, about 1¼ inches, 3¼ centimeters. Thickest part of the middle of the grip, 1 inch, almost kind of roundish in here, 2½ centimeters. All right, the blade, as I've already mentioned, 7½ inches long, 19 centimeters. There is a bit of a belly here. It's not perfectly straight and parallel to the spine. So at the widest point, 1¼ inches. Saying width is the widest point of the grip, 3¼ centimeters, with a stock thickness of 4 millimeters. Like I said, it's got some mass to it. Finish, it does have kind of a brushed stainless finish. Lines are pretty nice. Has a fuller in it and the logo on it. Spine definitely sharp enough to strike a ferro rod. Now, clip point blade, but there isn't any kind of edge on here. There's a little tiny bit of a bevel, but yeah, you've got pretty much 3 millimeters of blunt on the back of that. If I was going to try to put any kind of edge on this, I would have to take off a lot of steel. But as is, let's go ahead and put it through my usual test battery, and we'll talk about how it works for me. As for the edge and the edge geometry, saber grind, but it's not a very high saber grind. There's a lot of meat behind that edge, and we're definitely going to see how it performs in certain tasks. With a secondary bevel. Now, from the factory, it wasn't quite shaving sharp, and with use, I've had to refresh it a little bit, not fully resharpen it. But where it is now, after using it for about a week, doing, well, food prep and cutting up a bunch of cardboard and yeah, using it out in the yard on paper, not bad. Again, I don't think this is designed to be the sliciest knife, but it's a functional cutter. However, I was working with the cardboard. Yeah, it does sail through the cardboard, but one of the things you're going to see is the further it gets in the cardboard, that thickness does kind of bind up a bit. So yeah, cutting up big cardboard boxes started nice and then kind of got a bit stuck because of its thickness. All right, let's try the Flissa Bowie. Towards me, just for variation. Let me try the screwdriver grip with this one. And of course, reverse grip. Edge facing towards me. Lock the thumb. Not bad. It was a little slick in hand. Straight into the redwood. Edge towards me. Feeling a little slippage. Screwdriver grip. Feeling some hot spots there, but it works. Reverse grip. Not bad. Edge towards me. slippier thumb lock. I can't imagine it's going to have any problem with the bamboo test. Just fine. Fine carving. Nice stout grip. Get my thumb up on the back of it. Or I can pinch grip it too. The keenest carving tool. There's just way too much meat behind that edge, but I don't know. It just wants to bite deeper. All right, let's see. All right, that's not bad. Better. It does. Okay. Not bad at the acute angle. Bite to it. Yeah. That's something bigger. Got some decent bite to it, actually. Yeah. Okay. Prefers the heavier tasks to the finer ones. Some people think this is a stupid test. Felt good. Everything held together. The quick summary of my test results would be, I feel like heavier is better for this knife. Finer, keener, slicier tasks, I don't think it's built for it. So maybe if you're taking this out, pair it with something small and keen for the finer tasks. That definitely showed in my general use as I carried it around the property for about a week. As I mentioned, I took it out and I cut up some cardboard, and it could do it, but the thicker, wider the piece was, the more it would bind and stick, and I would struggle and then go reaching for a keener tool. This also showed in food prep. Not the finest, sliciest tool, but it could do the job, which also gives me a sense of how it might perform for game prep as well. Had to adjust my edge to get the finer slices, had to get the right angle, and yeah, I get my thumb up on the back of it. Also get it in kind of a chef's pinch grip. This is also where I first learned that if the grip or my hands are, or both are damp, it gets really grippy. When it's dry, it's kind of slick and round and maybe a little bit hard to hold on to and get control and leverage over. And that started to show when I took it outside. Now off camera, kind of idly, I did some debarking, delimbing, a little bit of light chopping, and it did work just fine. Again, the harder, choppier the task was, the better it did. It kind of punched above its size and weight that way, but in finer tasks. All right, before we get to that, the most martial tests, thrusting, stabbing, first into my pell, which is multiple layers of thick cardboard backed up by a couple of inches of compressed brown paper bag paper, up against my redwood target, and then to test heavier impact, straight into the redwood. Tests the tip, the penetration into the softer media, how the build holds together under linear impact, how it translates that linear impact back into my hands, and how secure my grip stays put under that kind of impact. And, well, I did the test dry. Dry hands, dry grip, maximum slippage is kind of what I got. Now, forward grip edge facing away from me, that guard did indeed perfectly well stop my hand from sliding up into danger. No problem there whatsoever, though it did feel a little slick. But when I reversed the blade towards me, North American Bowie style, okay, now the guard is going into squishy web of hand. So yeah, my hand slid up about that far under heavier impact. Not into sharpness, actually, believe it or not, but made me nervous. So I went ahead and tried screwdriver grip. Now, it's not one of my favorites, but I do find it useful for smaller blades that don't have guards to stop your hands from sliding into danger if you stab or thrust with them. And the idea of the screwdriver grip is you plant the butt of the knife into the hollow of your palm like you're holding a screwdriver, and that could be edge away from you or edge towards you. The problem with a bigger knife for me, though, is you have to choke way down on it, and it feels very unbalanced. I don't feel like I have a very good grip on it, and yeah, that was the case here. Made worse by, okay, sharp edges of pommel stabbing into the hollow of my palm, especially uncomfortable under the heavier direct into the redwood impact, made me want to stop doing that really quickly. But I could do it. Penetration of the softer media was great. I actually had to pry it out a few times. Penetration of the harder media, great. I actually had to pry it out a few times. No damage to the tip, no damage to the build. Speaking of damage, okay, I didn't throw it, mostly because I've had really bad disasters happen throwing stacked construction knives like this. I just don't feel it's built for it, and I don't even feel like it's balanced for it. So sorry I didn't try. There are limits to my madness. But I did take it to the bamboo test, which is an attempt to induce chip or roll or fragile edge by hacking and slashing into hard bamboo at different angles. And as expected, this just did just fine. But then, okay, as I said, heavier is better. The fine carving tasks, it could do it, and I could get a reasonable grip in a couple different ways using it that way. Use it up close to the base of the blade. But I just didn't feel like it was great at it. And it immediately made me want a keener, finer, slicier tool for that job. But then taking it to heavier carving, debarking and feather sticking, and really when I bit into the branches and the boards, then it felt better, performed better. And I think the rule for this knife is heavier is better. That also showed up in chopping. Yeah, I feel like this knife chops above its size and weight, and in that sense, the shape and slickness of the grip actually kind of work with me because I can get really good snap cuts at it. Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a bit. So yeah, I could get a really nice bite into boards and logs chopping. And yeah, I did go ahead and do my, well, what's kind of become my standard unrealistic batoning test, sending it sideways through a branch, which again is mostly to check the durability of the build, how it penetrates into a hard material doing that, and what kicks back into me doing that. And it did just fine. Heavier is better for this knife. All right, I don't want to make this too long, but I did promise a couple of comparisons with other knives that I have. They're about this length and this blade shape, so therefore similar philosophies of use. And I'll start with the Joker Zorro, Spanish-style Bowie. Now, this is a much lighter knife with a very keen, slicey, hollow ground edge. And while it held up to my impact and durability test, the fact that it has a partial tang does make me nervous, so since then I've kind of been babying it, using it for light to medium slicey utility tasks, and yes, I love it for martial use. But when we talk about a value for the money, this is more than twice as expensive as that. This is much more elegant and slicey, though. Let me go in the opposite direction next. Way back when, before I feel like I got any good at all at knife reviews, I did a feature on this APOC Wayward Camper. Now, this is a beefy boy. It is surprisingly thick, considering how narrow it is front to back. So slicey, not at all. Choppy, crowbar, sharpened tent stake. Yeah, this has pretty much become a garden tool for those insanely hard abusive uses, but not at all good for fine slicey tasks. So if I wanted something better overall, yeah, I'd probably pick this. And even though this is full tang and insanely durable, just not a very good knife as compared to, again, crowbar, sharpened tent stake. gardening, chopper, digging tool, whatever, and it is twice the price of this one. So this one, I'm going to say, better overall knife. What about the venerable, I almost said vulnerable, K-Bar USMC? All right, first of all, you got the history of this knife. And then there's also, with this particular example, my history with it. I've had this particular knife for 45 years. Better steel, better overall quality. It is a lighter, thinner knife with a much keener edge, so therefore much more useful, I would feel like, for the wider range of slicey tasks. But one of the things we've learned about these recently is the leather stacked grip, and then that rectangular stick tang underneath it, not as durable as we thought. Now, if you want more durable, I'd say go with something like a cold steel leather neck. But yes, I did put this knife through crazy hard field use over my lifetime. Since I learned the potential vulnerabilities of it, yeah, I've been babying it, because I don't want to lose not only my history with it, but there's also, if I was going to replace the thing, it would cost me 3 of these. While we're on the K-Bar subject, though, what about the BK7? This is not even fair. Full tang, superior steel. I mean, this 1095 Crovan in all reasonable uses has proven itself to be essentially indestructible. Plus you have a much keener blade geometry, so it is slicier while being more durable. Awesome knife, and yes, I'm going to do an update video on it because I've made further modifications. Speaking of, though, I think on the current market, these are going stock for 110, 120 US dollars or more. Plus, I put about $60 more into the modifications as compared to this. So I guess there's the budget factor. But yeah, you do get the quality that you're paying for here. Absolutely. To be revisited. A knife we haven't looked at yet, spoiler alert for the future. The Mora Pathfinder, the big one. All right, this is a bit lighter. It is a Scandi ground blade, so a whole lot slicier. And speaking of the Moras, we will have to talk about the fact that this does have a rat tail tang under polymer grip, but the smaller ones have held up awesomely. Now, this bigger one is theoretically designed for even harder use. How's it going to hold up? Well, to be continued, but yeah, this is going to cost you more than 2 of these. Do I have a knife of this size and general shape? It's cheaper than this. Yes, I have one that I can think of, and that is Cold Steel GI Tanto, which is a keener blade. Now, people are worried about that tip snapping off, and yes, it does, and you might have to reshape it. We're talking about a $10, $15 knife that is full tang, basic cheap plastic scales that will probably break off if you abuse it, but easy to replace or just cord wrap over, whatever. Yeah, I have no fear of throwing this knife. Or getting 6 of them and throwing them or whatever, you know. So this is a knife I'm not worried about, and it's a great tool, especially for the money. This one's prettier and kind of a more classic design, especially I have to be a fan of, as I mentioned, that Crocodile Dundee aesthetic. So basically what I'm saying is I feel like for the money, this is a pretty good value, but don't expect it to be a fine slicer. Good chopper, though. How is it as a martial tool? All right, quickly down the unflattering waistline view to talk about carry and deployment. A leather sheath with a nice belt loop, flexible, moves with me on my hip. If anything, I might like it to ride just a little bit lower, maybe an inch. But as is, it's not bad. Like I said, the thumb brake tab is pretty generous, really easy to find without looking and popping it off, and I get a very clean draw. Now, while we're down here, we should probably talk about optics. That does look very much like a classic field or hunting knife and less like a weapon. Before we get into martial handling, really quick, touching on one of the driving philosophies of this series based on the wise words of Jorge Prina, that the best martial knife for you, not only the one you have on you when you need it, and I hope you never need it for that, but Perhaps it's the knife that you use the most for the most things, therefore you're the most comfortable with it and more likely to have it with you even if you're not thinking about carrying a weapon. That also is good for optics, as I mentioned in the last section. Having to carry a knife openly where I live, this looks very much like a classic hunting outdoor tool, not so much like a scary weapon, but again, it depends on whose eyes you're talking about. But as for the martial use of this knife, now I did talk about some of the ups and downs of the grip in stabbing and thrusting, but I feel like it's functional enough that I can thrust and stab with it with the edge facing away from me, a little less secure with the edge facing towards me, which gives me more of that cutting action in the stab, which is one of the fundamental features of, for instance, North American Bowie and certain styles of Tanto Jutsu. No sharpened clip point on the back. Am I going to do something about that later? I don't know yet. But I feel like I've got enough of a beak I could bite into a target, maybe create an opening to do something else in a quick combo. That's also going to be true with the edge facing away from me for doing back cuts, whether they be rising, horizontal, or downwards reverse. At the very least, I can get some bite into a target or arc a stab around an obstruction. Now, as I mentioned, I trained martially with my K-bar for a long, long time, and I learned to really appreciate the blade shape, not only the tip, and that one does have a sharpened back edge, but the belly is enough to give me a good slash hack hewing cut. And this one has more mass to it, which therefore also gives me a better snap cut. And in that, this particular grip shape, and maybe it being a little bit slicker, the way it rotates in my hand, does give me a really nice dynamic snap. So yeah, that actually feels really good. That's kind of awesome in terms of being able to attack like that. So there are those features. Now, I feel like I might just have enough mass that I could make some use out of striking with the spine or the flat, but it's not going to be a primary attack, a fight-ending attack, something I can use maybe to, again, create an opening to do something else in a fast combo. So it just increases the versatility of the knife. As for grips, no, I'm not going to put my finger above the guard, but I could put my thumb on the back saber style, or hook it over the side, or put it on the side in more of a foil grip, or what we're going to talk about later, the Facone grip. What about reverse grip, though? Well, first we have to get there, which means we have to talk about transition. Now, it is narrow enough at the top, and the balance does do well for my finger twirling habit. Now, I don't recommend it because it's not very secure, very easy to fumble under adrenaline, or if you're not really good at it. I like it, well, not only because I've been doing it for a long time, but because it always keeps the edge facing in the same direction. But as for pinch flipping, I said a little tiny bit of flare down there, but not much. This grip really does taper towards the end, and I don't feel the most secure. There's nothing to get in my way, even of my stubby fingers. And again, if my hands are a little bit damp, it does improve the grippiness of that leather. So it's not bad, but I feel like in a real situation, under adrenaline, having that destroy my fine motor movement in that chaotic situation, I'm either not going to transition or, yeah, I'm going to do it in two hands. But once it's in the reverse grip, okay, edge facing away from me, not only do I have a good powerful stab, pretty secure grip on the knife, but enough belly to slash with. Upwards, horizontally, downwards, I've got all those options and the hook of that clip point profile, even though I don't have a sharpened edge. Now, turning it edge towards me, a little less secure in my hand. I could lock my thumb. I don't have anything really on the front other than a little bit of a corner to make that forward stroke, but you get the cutting action on the stab, which is pretty devastating. And we are going to be talking about this grip, especially in its context in combinations with other weapons that make it very effective. I mentioned that, yeah, you could potentially use a screwdriver grip, but I feel like this is just a little too big and awkward for that, for at least my comfort. Speaking of, well, that pommel digging into my hand, it does have a steel butt cap. You could use it as an impact tool, either in martial or window breaker in an emergency. But since I don't know how it's connected, I wouldn't use it as a hammer. So I think it's reasonable and actually surprisingly comfortable as a Marshall tool. It's a classic design. Actually has me considering maybe seeing if I can find a decent iteration of that classic Crocodile Dundee knife, so maybe stay tuned for that. But for 30 bucks, overall, I think it's generally a good knife and surprisingly good at heavier field tasks. Again, I feel like that's where it excels. The chopping and the heavy carving. And I feel like it can take it. All right, so I don't know what's next. Again, my current range of motion is limiting me a little bit. I am really feeling my age right now. But until then, as always, thank you all so much for watching, liking the video, subscribing, following my journey, putting up with my madness, adding to our conversation. And I hope to see you back for, well, maybe sword content, but probably the next one's going to be another knife.